May the peace of Yahweh be with each and every one of you. If you have your 13th book of Israel, we're going to be reading from 13th book of Israel, part 1. And we're going to be in chapter 22. And I want you to catch this title here. The name here is Enter My Rest. This message and prophecy were taught in the beginning by Abel. This message and prophecy. Now, prophecy is for who, brethren? The believers. So then, if we don't trust in the prophecies, then we are not believers, not true believers. One of the sisters spoke a few days ago, and she was saying, and she was helping all of us rethink about the trials that we go through. To think positive when she said, I expect great things. Remember that when she was taking us through that? Okay, well, praise Yahweh. Well, it's in the prophecies that we see these great things. So without the prophecies, then, of course, we won't even have much to believe in. If you'll turn over to page 232. We're going to begin down at verse 7 toward the bottom corner of the page here. Pastor is speaking here. He says, then Yeketska 14 shows, well, 13 and 14, when sin reaches its peak. We will see food and water shut off, and we're blessed. Here we are, alive in this time period where every man in here's own eyes is beholding water being cut off. As a matter of fact, California has already said we're under a year left. And of course, where there's no water, then you can't grow any food. We will see food and water shut off. And of course, sin has reached its peak right now. It's everywhere. It's all over the world. The troubles that we're having, we see it on every day's news. And I can't show all the news. We'd be up here all day. Just with the men that are in here now, we couldn't talk about the news from all of our cities that we all come from. It's just that much that's taking place. One of the news events that I saw since coming to Yahweh's great and awesome feast is a man that the police officer shot in North Charleston, South Carolina. I don't know if you men got an opportunity to see that yet. A 50-year-old man who got pulled over for, I think it was a broken tail light. Okay, he was shot 8 times, I believe it was, while he was running away from the policeman. 50 years old, running away from a police officer, he gets shot 8 times. He's dead. He's dead. And there's absolutely, not only through this example, but many, many more, you can see why the world needs the peaceful solution. You can see why Yahweh's training us in it, because there's no love. Sin is truly at its peak and love is gone cold. Where a tail light is worth a man's life, a tail light. We have to train man. We have to retrain man, if you would, into having love and care and concern. Verse 8, but now, if you remember, what we started with to begin with was 2 Corinthians 7:1. The Spirit perfecting holiness. That was 2 Corinthians 7:1, Pastor says, the Spirit perfecting holiness. Now, we know the Spirit, because Yahweh's taught us that, hasn't it? We know, Yachanan 6:63, we know the Spirit is the laws of Yahweh. And by keeping the laws of Yahweh and practicing them very diligently, we begin to develop a love for them. Perfecting holiness. And Pastor says we should remember that. And then after that, if you go over to Genesis 1, he says, and read what Yahweh has in plan, say that a little better, what Yahweh has in plan and the message that was taught from the beginning, Yahweh says, I will make man in my image and in my likeness. Listen to that very well. Okay? I will make man in my image and in my likeness, according to my likeness, and they will have authority. How? According to my likeness. So what Yahweh is doing with us is teaching us how to rule with authority the same way Yahweh would rule. Not the way in which the Gentiles rule. You may remember from many other sermons. Yahweh doesn't rule by force. He rules by teaching and training and teaching and training and long-suffering and patience and teaching and training. And we have 2 billion coming that we are going to be teaching and training and be long-suffering with and show them the character of Yahweh. Just as Yahweh so patiently done the same with us. So according to my likeness, and they will have authority according to my likeness, and they will have authority. Well, of course, the authority is over what? All the things, all the creeping things. Now, this authority is not a free gift, so to speak. It's something that's very much conditional. It is very much conditional. We must keep the laws of Yahweh. We must be loyal to the work of Yahweh. We must be true to keeping the laws and teaching them. And as you'll see in this sermon, if you recollect, very much so teaching them to our children as well. Pastor says now, a lot of the other apostles spoke on this. He says, prophets spoke on this, and they called it different things. And he's talking about being able to have authority over the things in which creep upon the earth, okay? But he says, but it all amounts to the microorganisms that will obey us. Okay, and he says, don't forget Yeketska 37:1, and we're going to go down there and read it. But don't forget that Satan lost this opportunity. She had this ability. And because of adultery, she lost it. So don't forget that in our walk with Yahweh. Sin cuts us off from Yahweh, but it also cuts us off from getting this authority. It's not a small thing at all. Verse 11. In Yeketska 37:1, he says, the hand of Yahweh was upon me. And Pastor says that's going to take several sermons right there, but we'll get it later. He says, and he carried me out in the spirit, in the laws, in the plan of Yahweh. And he says another few sermons. He says, the spirit of Yahweh, and set me down in the midst of the valley, which was full of bones. In verse 2, he caused me to pass by them all around, and behold, there were very many in the open valley, and lo, they were very dry. In verse 3, then he said to me, Son of man, can these bones live? And I answered, Oh, Father Yahweh, you know. And again he said to me, prophesy to these bones and say to them, O dry bones, hear the words of Yahweh. And see what Pastor says here. Dry bones, hear, hear, hear. That's to hear with your ears. Dry bones. You're talking to dry bones. Saying, hear the word of Yahweh. That's the authority that we're going to have. Authority like Yahweh, like Yeshua. Yeshua commanded the wind. As Pastor says, beautiful, isn't it? And yes, it is. All right, continuing. Well, of course, you've got now with this, you've got Son of Man. Well, the Son of Man here in Genesis 1:26 is what he's speaking of. The Son of Man, the Son of Man. You saw pastors trying to pound that in our minds so we don't go off in la-la land with the religions. Genesis 1:26, he says, and Yahweh says, I will make man in my image. Now that means all the sons of men that are born after that, and including this man he was speaking to at this time. or these men, he says. You've got to remember that this was not written in chronological order by any means, and it was here a little and there a little, and you've got to put it together. And there was a lot of great teaching going on at the house of Abel, which was the house of Yahweh at that time, by Abel, being taught by Abel, in fact, just like we're being taught by Yahweh's last days Abel. Look over to verse 19. Pastor says, well, in Yachanan 5, there's something here I want to make sure and read. He says, let's see. In Yachanan 5:27, and has given him authority to execute judgment also, because he is the Son of Man. What I want you to take note of there is that Yeshua is our judge. Okay, because Pastor makes note of that later in the sermon. In verse 20, he says, if Christians could get this in their heads and stop, they're thinking he's half God, half Holy Ghost, or half this and half that. They really don't know, but they're interpreting. Well, they're not the one sent. But it throws them off from their understanding. Down to verse 21. Speaking of Yahweh here, he says, he'll have no other work except his house. That's what Moshe 3 says. He's only going to fool around with one family of the earth. That's what Yahweh says. So then, there is no other family other than this family that Yahweh is going to, and I'll just parallel that, fool with, or teach, or as Moshe says, allow to know his way. There is no place else to go. There is no fall away group to join. There's no religion to go try to hook up with to learn the ways of Yahweh. Because Yahweh only does it through one place. He's only going to deal with that one. That's one that's going to have the power over the microorganisms. That is, if they are loyal. Like royal. If they give their full attention, as the donkey in the olive tree cloud. See that donkey up there, men? Can you see that in the middle of the sanctuary? Look at that donkey. Look at that attention. There's no swerving. There's nothing dragging its attention away from the branch. Not wife, son, not job, not promotion like what was offered to Yeshua. Remember, Satan took him upon this exceeding mountain and offered him great things. Maybe it's, again, $200,000 job or something. That donkey's full attention is on the branch, just like ours should be on Israel Abel Hawkins. Okay? Down to verse 22. But if you look back at verse 24, truly, truly, I say to you, he who hears my words, my teachings pertaining to the laws and the prophets, believing Yahweh who sent me, has everlasting life. Now, that's the conditions of having everlasting life. We have to hear the words. You're hearing the words right now. That's what you came to the great feast of Yahweh for, and what you keep the Sabbath for, and why you study, why you are looking into the Israel Says program. If you haven't seen it yet, man, we got one more day. Get with me. Grab me. Okay? It is awesome. Not one person that I've displayed that program to was disappointed. Not one. It's been an amazing thing. But receiving these teachings is part of the process. Okay, he who hears my words, not going to hear them in a group around the corner. You only hear them here from the place that Yahweh has chosen to place his name. Only in prophecy, right? My teachings pertaining to the laws and the prophets, believing Yahweh who sent me has everlasting life. This pastor says this is the road to everlasting life. This is what I want you to do, is to understand the full thing here that Yeshua, of course, was speaking of. He says, now get those two scriptures in your mind. And verse 25 says, truly, truly, I say to you, the hour is coming, and now is, when the dead will hear the voice of the Son of Yahweh. He's speaking of you. Now, pastor says, now, remember this day, this is my beloved son this day of baptism. Just like when we all were baptized, we were born again, we became the sons of Yahweh. And the dead are going to hear the sons of Yahweh who qualifies. The dead are going to hear their voice. Down to verse 25. Now in verse 27, and has given him authority. We're still talking about the Son of Man now. And has given him authority to execute judgment also, because he is the Son of Man. Pastor says he doesn't give that authority to the angels, as they call them, as the King James Version calls them, the heavenly messengers, which are higher than us at this time, but they won't be that way long. When you receive your subconscious mind, wow, that brings something to my mind. When you receive your subconscious mind, this is something that they want themselves, but they won't go through these trials and prove themselves. So if we don't go through the trials and we don't prove ourselves, we will not get the subconscious mind as well. So we can, again, refocus on our trials and understand that they're there to prove us, is to continue being loyal and royal, truly converting out of the ugliness, this red men that we were, into beautiful saints of Yahweh. And there was a comment there. Hold on one moment. He says, when you receive your subconscious mind, when we were previewing, and I know some of you were in here, when we were previewing Israel Hawkins' program, we were finding all kinds of things. I mean, all kinds of things. And I couldn't help but to speak with the men and said, Pastor's always said we're going to be amazed at all the things he's taught us when we have our subconscious mind. You're going to get a glimpse into that very quickly when you cut on your software and you start studying into it. You're going to be amazed at how many things Yahweh has taught you. Pastor is really awesome. All right, let me continue there. But he says they won't go. He's talking about the Malachim here, these fallen Malachim. Let's see. But they won't go through these trials and prove themselves. Well, mankind is doing that. That's the reason Yahweh made you the way he made you, subject to vanity. Because you've got to prove to Yahweh that you want this more than anything on earth, more than anything in your life, more than your mother, grandmother, child. Bank account, career. He says, praise Yahweh. Now, once you do that, then Yahweh can give you this authority that he's talking about here at this time. Look over to verse 29. He says, now I would beg you again, look carefully at these scriptures. I know a lot of people are hearing this and they're going to, I want you to go to Yachanan Mark. And he says, you are not going to receive this power unless you give it your 100%. Now, brother, let me ask you a question. Who in here wants to hurt Israel Hawkins? Who wants to harm Israel Hawkins? Okay, well, let's keep reading. No one answered that they would want to do so. He says in Yachanan Mark 3, there are two things that are plaguing me. So let's take special note of this. Making me lose sleep of a night, as he says, because I know some are going to fall into these traps. In Yachanan Mark 3:33, look at verse 33, and he answered them saying, who is my mother or my brothers? Verse 34, then he looked around, those surrounding him, and said, behold my mother and my brothers, just like we do at Yahweh's great feast. For whosoever does the will of Yahweh, the same is my brother, my sister, my mother. If the person does not do the will of Yahweh, then why? Why are we spending time? All we're doing is proving ourselves not loyal. Make sure you get with your counselors on that issue. But please don't allow them to take this great authority or cause you not to qualify for this great authority that you've been trained for. You are practicing the laws to receive that authority. You are developing the holiness to receive that authority. Don't just give it away for someone that would spit on the name Yahweh or Yahshua. If a so-called blood relative of mine, Yahweh willing, if this person rejects Yahweh, as far as I'm concerned, they reject you. And they reject me. And I try to replay that over and over. You can do a lot better job than me, but it's something I try to replay in my mind because I want to be with the family of Yahweh. All right, let's continue down verse 33. And I say to you, be turning over to Matthew 19, Pastor says, I say to you, Yahshua is our pattern. And we're going to have to make ourselves like Yahshua. It was Yahshua who said, who is my mother? Who is my brother and my sisters? And we have to make ourselves in that pattern. We have to walk. We are obligated to walk as he walked. And to make ourselves like Yahshua. Train your children to be like Yahshua. Please listen to this, heads of households. Please. He says, train your children to be like Yahshua. Like Yahshua lived when he was here on this earth. The things he did. The things he taught. These are the things we ought to talk about and train our children in. Train your children to be just like him doing these things. You be like him doing these things. Don't try to train your children one way and say, well, let's go see some unconverted kinfolks. You remember early in the feast, the example one of the sons of Israel, Abel, brought up about I think he had a blue card, but he had the word red on it. That's bringing confusion to the child's mind. How long does it take to hopefully untrain that out of that child's mind? When you do have to deal with unconverted people, explain to your children why. Well, that's the man that came to fix the refrigerator. That's the only reason he's here. So pastor says, let's see, don't train your children one way and say, let's go see some unconverted kinfolks. On the other thing, or let's go to Six Flags, to the Ferris wheel, or let's go waste some time and waste some money. That could be used in the work. show your children when you give offerings. Tell them why you give offerings to Yahweh. Allow them to practice giving offerings. Train them to be like Yeshua. He says, don't get your mind back on the world. This is what he says. 3 out of 4 will fall away because they're drawn back into the stupidity that the world is filled with. You remember the proverb says, don't go near her door. She's brought down a numberless groups of people, numberless strong. Verse 34, in Matthew 19:17, he says, but he said to him, why do you question me about righteousness? There's only one who is the standard of perfection. Of righteousness, that one is making us into his image. This is his plan. His plan is not going to fail. He's making us into his image, into his likeness. He drives out all others, as we'll see in just a moment. And he is Yahweh. So if you would enter into life, keep the laws of Yahweh. Keep Yahweh's laws. He says, look down. See, we have a few minutes. Turn over to page 236, if you would. Look at verse 38. He says, to be a part of my family, you've got to overcome these whims and desires. And then he gives you the peaceful solution, character education program in these last days to guide us and to show us just how to become like Yeshua himself. Now, these are the words of Yahweh's last days witness. He's telling us, use this program. Read the sermon, brethren. If we don't use it, we're not going to be there with him. This is like that final sifting of the wheat. It's what polishes us off. It is the laws of Yahweh. Don't even entertain these thoughts that the peaceful solution is not the laws of Yahweh. Anyone who's read it knows and continues to practice it. Because you don't just read it one time. It doesn't work that way. But he's given us the Peaceful Solution Character Education Program in these last days to guide us and show us just how to become like Yeshua himself. Get the books. And don't let them stay on the shelf. Use them. Now look over to verse 42. But he says here in Hebrews chapter 3, he said this before he put mankind on trial. And said, now you're going to have to work. Pastor talked about Yeshua and the great worker. I think we've learned that like never before here, Yeshua's memorial and the great compassion. Well, we're going to have to work and prove that we won't sin and that we'll turn from all sin. And if you keep that in mind, brethren, when this sin comes up to you in the workplace or even a conflict among your brothers, and you remember, this is my opportunity, this is it right here, I'm going to show Yahweh, I'm not going to do it. I'm not going to do it anymore. Instead of thinking, oh, man, why I got to go through this again? Expect great things, if you would. Expect them from your actions, your responses, in the situations in which Yahweh allows us to go through. But he says, now you're going to have to work and prove that you won't sin and that you'll turn from all sin and you will do my will totally. This is what Great Kohan Shaul had brought out a couple of days ago, Pastor said, previous to this. So it takes a lot of work, brethren, when we have to go through the tests and the trials to show Yahweh that that donkey is us. And so we know that we're going to be put to test to see if we will break our focus on being in unity with Yahweh's great house. If you all please stand. I have a great honor to present to you the great and mighty priest in Yahweh's house, the great Kohan, Al Yanai Hawkins.
Shalom, everyone. You may be seated. May the peace of Yahweh be with each and every one of you. I'm just going to continue on from where the great Kohan stopped. Hebrews 3:15. Hebrews 3:15 says, while it is said today, if you will hear his voice, do not harden your hearts. And it goes on to say in verse 44 here, it says, do not harden your hearts as in the provocation. That means where they're actually provoked. Well, that's what mankind is doing to one another right now. And Pastor went into saying, verse 45 here says, that Yahweh brought all this joy and gladness to us this feast. And I saw quite a lot of joy and gladness this feast, and it's still continuing, and I'm still rejoicing, and I hope everyone else is rejoicing at this feast. It's been a wonderful, a great, great feast. It says, we could have had men over here with guns shooting each other, women hitting each other over the heads, pulling out your hairs and taking telephones away from each other. That's they're doing in the world. But you live together peacefully. You know what a miracle that is? Because it's something rare. You don't find that in the world. It's only in the house of Yahweh. That's where you find peace and true peace. People living together, taking care of one another, serving one another instead of looking to take advantage of one another. That's not done anywhere anywhere in the earth except the house of Yahweh. So it goes on, do not harden your hearts as in the provocation. That is provoking to anger and saying, you've got to overcome this. Just as he said to Cain, the desire to sin is with you, but you must overcome it. Well, he says here now in verse 16, for some, when they heard, rebelled. But not all rebelled now. Not all rebelled because we had a family that actually brought forth Yeshua out of all of that mess, who came out of Egypt through Moshe. And verse 17, but with whom did he test? Whom was he testing? 40 years. Was it not those who sinned, whose corpses fell in the wilderness? And to whom did he vow they will not enter his rest? Enter his rest. What he is speaking of there now, enter his rest, that they will not enter his rest, but to those who did not obey, these are the ones he vowed will never enter his rest. So we see that they could not enter in because of unbelief. Because of unbelief. The disobedience, that was the cause of their unbelief, their disobedience. And now in verse 41, therefore, since the promise of entering his rest remains, let us be faithful so that none of you should come short of it. And remember Hebrews 3 verse 12, it says, be on guard, brothers, that there not be in any of you an evil heart of unbelief, an evil heart of unbelief departing from the living Father. We continue on here, verse 2 here. Sorry, that was Hebrews 4:1, correction. Hebrews 4:1, it says, therefore, since the promise of entering his rest remains, let us be faithful so that none of you shall come short of it. So Hebrews 4:2 now. For this message was preached to us as well as to them. But the word which they heard did not benefit them because they did not share in the faith of those who obeyed. That is, those who obeyed the message. And verse 3, however, we who have believed do enter that rest. That is, we're going to enter that rest. And he has said so, and he has said so, I vowed in my, in my wrath is what I'm reading here, but that's a little bit wrong, Pastor says. But anyway, don't get your mind on that. They will not enter into my rest, although the works were finished from the foundation of the earth. That is, they were prophesied to be finished. And of course, I remember the prophecy concerning the last day's witness, says that his rest will be beautiful, his rest will be glorious, and it's because he's going to be teaching us how to keep the Sabbath. He's going to be bringing back the true Sabbath, teaching us how to keep the Sabbath day the way Yeshua kept the Sabbath day, Yes. I want you to keep that in mind. I'm continuing now. This is verse 54 of the book of Yisrayl. I want you to keep in mind entering his rest here now, and Yahweh promises rest, starting with keeping your appointments, of course. That's the start of entering into the rest of Yahweh. This entering into the rest. It is very important for us to keep all our appointments with Yahweh, because that is the first thing that shows obedience to Yahweh. There are two things shown in this. Entering into the rest starts with keeping our appointments with Yahweh, keeping the seventh-day Sabbath. If you turn over to 2 Chronicles, this gives us a hint of what is spoken of here, and also what is given in Genesis that we'll see later. 2 Chronicles 15, found on page 363. This is 2 Chronicles now. They vowed an oath in front of Yahweh with a loud voice. I skipped to verse 57 now of the book of Yisrayl. So 2 Chronicles 15, verse 14. They vowed an oath in front of Yahweh with a loud voice, with a shout of joy. You hear any of that going on here? Yes. Praise Yahweh. A very joyous feast and much shouting, a shout of joy with trumpets and with ram's horns. And verse 15 now, 2 Chronicles. All Yada rejoiced over the oath, for they had vowed it with all their heart and mind. Remember, that was Asa was the king, and he was trying to do the best he could, trying to do righteousness. And then the prophet Azariah came to him and told him, to encourage him, basically, and told him his works, that will receive a reward, and just to encourage him. And he was motivated, he was encouraged. And he and all of Yada bound themselves to an oath to serve Yahweh with all of their might, with all of their heart, with all of their being, which is what we're seeing here. And they all rejoiced over the oath which they bound themselves to before Yahweh. So verse 16, and I'm going to go off of 15 here, verse 15. It says, all Yada rejoiced over the oath, for they had vowed it with all their heart and mind, and had sought him with all their being. So he was found by them, and Yahweh gave them peace. Now, actually, that should have been translated rest. Yahweh gave them rest. He gave them peace or rest all around. I'm skipping down again to 59 from there. It says, verse 16, Asa the king then removed his grandmother. Wow, pastor said, removed his grandmother. But Yahweh, this is my grandmother, not his, not theirs. This is my grandmother. She's precious. And pastor says she can destroy your life right now. She could destroy everything you work for. Grandma can do that. She sure can. Children can do it if you let them. Unconverted children. Unconverted kin. This is what it's speaking of. And he shows you an example here of how they got this rest. They had to, part ways with the past, with what they left behind in Egypt. They didn't have to look back. So this is an example that's shown to us right here. And he shows us an example right now how they got this rest. So that we can enter his rest, we need to follow these examples. How they were able to actually enter into that part of Yahweh's rest and actually live it here as an example on earth. And this took place for about 16 years. They lived in peace and rest and joy for about 16 years straight here. Asa the king even removed his grandmother, Maacah, from being queen mother because she had made an obscene and disgusting image of Asherah, Ishtar, Astarte, that is Easter. She was celebrating Easter, the same thing that Jeremiah condemned them for and saying, this is the reason you're suffering. You cut yourself off from Yahweh. You're not in his rest anymore. And you can't be as long as you keep this up. The sacred pole, which Asa cut down and smashed and burned in the Kidron Valley. And verse 17, although he did not completely remove the high places from Israel, Asa's heart was perfect towards Yahweh all his life. And verse 18, he also brought into the house of Yahweh those things which his father had dedicated, and also those things which he himself had dedicated, silver, gold, and other articles. Verse 19, then there was no more war. No war. You see that? Peace, rest. Gave them peace from the world. Gave them peace from the world. The world won't repent. The world is building rockets. And let's be turning over to 2nd Yochanan. 2nd Yochanan. I'm going to skip right there to the next verse 65 here. The world is building the destructive weapons that started in this generation. This generation which began in 1934. This generation, 1934, when the last day's witness was born. They're building these destructive weapons, rockets, ballistic missiles, and so on. And Yahweh before that says knowledge will be increased. And this is what you're going to do with the knowledge that I've given you. The increase in knowledge. You are going to take this and build war weapons. And of course, they could have used this knowledge for righteousness, but of course, they are not trained, so what comes to their mind always is to make war and war and war, which is why the house of Yahweh is the only place you're going to find peace. Praise Yahweh. So all their mind is on taking advantage of one another, not servitude. Remember, servitude, that's Yahweh's attitude in you. That was great. That's the attitude of servitude. We've been taught that is Yahweh's way. And Yeshua was an example to us, as we heard during the Seder, that even while he was going to be sacrificed, he still was caring up to the last minute, showing care and concern for the people that he was responsible for. And that is the kind of attitude that we should have to serve one another and rejoice doing so. We should rejoice doing so. Learn to rejoice doing so. One of the ladies I was working and listening to the speeches yesterday, and one of the ladies, I think her name was Pearl Thursby, I believe is the way they pronounced it. But she said, you can't see this. But you can certainly see, talking about the Peace Solution Character Education Program. You can't see it, but you can certainly see the improvement. You can see the improvement. You can see the effect it has on people. But you can't see character, because it's, you can't see character itself, but you can see the effect that positive character has on a person. You can see the way he conducts himself and the way he goes about his business. You can see the product, the result of practicing true moral character in a person. Much like what Yeshua said. But I'm skipping down now. Now this message, he said, this is 69, verse 69, book of Yisrayl. Well, now this message, he said, this message was taught in the beginning. He said in the beginning, there's only one beginning for mankind. This message that I was just bringing you just now, how to have peace and entering this peace and so forth, it was actually given in Genesis. But here in 2nd Yochanan 1, there's only one chapter there, so verse 6. And this is love. This is love. This is love, that we walk after his laws. Those are the laws that you have heard from the beginning, that you should walk in them. I don't believe that. Surely you can't believe that. Pastor is saying here, laughing. So let's go back to Genesis 2. Understanding that this is the law, that we walk in his laws. Genesis 2. I'm skimming now to verse 72, book of Yisrael now. Now here in Genesis, if you turn to chapter 2, notice verse 9. Genesis 2:9. And out of the ground Yahweh made every tree grow that is pleasant to the sight, something you can really rejoice over. That is what we saw at this feast, as with all feasts. And this was a special one. I really enjoyed myself this feast, though. Anyway, so all of these things, desirable for food, pleasant to see, pleasant to live with, servitude, rejoicing as we serve one another. That's the tree of life. The tree of life. Well, what does that tell you if you look back to verse 7? You'll see Abel's teaching. Abel's teaching. That is still in Genesis 2 now. Verse 7. I'm skimming out to verse 74, book of Israel. Get it now. Everybody read it for yourself. You see the tree of life. Remember Yeshua. Yeshua said he doesn't take his children from trees of thistles, trees of thorns. He said these are all false teaching, false religion. He said a righteous tree cannot produce that kind of fruit. An unrighteous tree can produce this right here. They can't produce the pleasantness. No, they produce war, as we see out in the world. Every day you turn on the news, what you see is violence, violence, and violence. That seems to be the only thing they talk about. We never we hardly see things talking about people serving themselves, except maybe if they're going to talk about the peaceful solution, if they ever do talk about it. That's the only time you see people serving one another. But out in the world, what they seem to learn every day is war. And we know the time will come they will not learn war anymore. So an unrighteous tree will not bring forth this kind of righteous fruits, as we say in Matthew 7:18. Although they think this is desirable when they want to steal land, houses, money, people, molest children, seduce women, seduce men, they think this is desirable, but it bites back. It bites back, and it's confusion. And this is confusion. And we've heard articles, and we've heard it brought forth at the House of Yahweh many times about these things getting in the mind and causing confusion. And we see science now catching up with this and now understanding these things and backing this up with research that shows that viruses, as well as other kinds of bugs, bacteria, even protozoa, we heard of toxoplasma gondii, that they are able to actually control or change or alter the behavior of people or their host, be it a human being or an animal. They're actually able to alter the behavior. Okay, even there's a virus called chlorella that is found to also be able to cause this kind of behavioral change in people that are infected. So it goes into the brain and it changes a person, alters the person's behavior. So it goes into the mind, and the scripture says this is confusion. Pastor's been saying this for years, and science was confused about this, And it weakens the mind, and it does weaken the mind. It ruins the mind. Their minds are so defiled right now, they think that dropping a bomb, killing families, killing children, they don't even know why they're fighting, babies. The doctor that they gave a life sentence, the man is not guilty. The doctor that gave a life sentence for killing babies, for when the abortion is carried out and the baby is found to still be alive, they put something like a scissor or something to cut the spinal cord somewhere in the neck, and they gave him life imprisonment. They said it was murder. But Pastor is saying here that he wasn't guilty. It is what he was taught. It's what he's been taught, just like Jerry Sandusky, if you remember. So it says, they've told him over and over, this is right, this is okay. Even the Supreme Court said it's okay. Well, they finally admitted it was murder. That's one thing that they did that they've been hiding all this time, that they can't produce peace, they can't produce rest, they can't produce anything enjoyable and endurable. If we quickly skip on answers to, let's see. So talking about Abel's teaching very quickly, verse 77, book of Yisrayl says, well, look back now to verse 7 now, and you'll see Abel's teaching here in the beginning. Genesis 2:7, and Yahweh formed man of the dust of the ground and breathed into his nostrils the breath of life, and man became a living being. Well, the King James says a living soul, I believe. Well, what does that say? They're laughing. What's he actually saying? You wouldn't know from the words they were choosing. But anyway, let's just look at the word breath. Breath. And this is Abel's teaching. The word breath that he breathed into his nostrils. The word actually means here, according to Strong Concordance or every other intelligent dictionary that I've seen, it means divine inspiration. Divine inspiration. Then it means intellect. Well, what does intellect mean? It means teaching. It means learning. It means, what you're learning here. You're learning here how to be peaceful and kind and loving. This is the love that Yahweh taught, desirable. And it also means, now get this word because it does mean the spirit. We heard the Gregorian before me said, refer to Yahweh 6:63, the spirit is the Lord. But you've got to know what spirit means. And praise Yahweh, we do know what spirit means in the house of Yahweh. That Abel was actually teaching here was the breath of life, eternal life. And it was a teaching on how to live eternally. It was a teaching of how to live eternally. And, if you look at verse 9 again, he said the tree of life, that's what he was teaching, the tree of life to the people, teaching knowledge to them. And verse 8, Yahweh planted a garden eastward. Eastward meaning first or before. First or before. And I'm skimming down to 84. Abel was the teacher, as is shown in Genesis 4. By the time this took place right here, we had a pretty great population going. And of course, Abel had a flock following Yahweh. Cain, on the other hand, also had a flock, following Easter goddesses, rabbits laying eggs, and so forth. And they were saying, oh no, we're like the gods. When I die, I'm going to become a god, and I'm going to float around in heaven on a cloud, And of course, this also is pictured here, these two systems, the Babylon and the Zerubbabel, which represent the race the pastor was speaking about here recently. So Yahweh planted a garden before. Yahweh planted a garden eastward. The word here actually means before. The word here means actually before, aforetime or afore, ever or everlasting. We have examples of that, but that should be enough for now. And of course, Abel went on to teach, verse 9, that out of the ground Yahweh made every tree. Out of the ground, this means he taught about microorganisms. Out of the ground. This was a teaching of Abel. How did he get here? And then he taught mankind. We see this teaching throughout the Holy Scriptures. Now, I remember several sermons I brought to you showing the creeping things that the earth creeps, the creeping things with which the earth creeps. In fact, if you take a handful of soil, what most people see is just dirt. But if you were to put your microbiology hat on, what you will see, if you were able to see microscopic things, you won't be seeing just a pile of dirt in your hand. What you're going to be seeing is, billions of microorganisms just crawling on top of one another, and their enzymes, of course, the bugs and their enzymes just swarming. That's the word, swarming. That's what you're going to see. So the earth really creeps with these things. That's backed up by science. Now, mankind is getting close to this, mainly because we brought it out several years ago and they're checking into it, trying to catch up, like I said, with the House of Yahweh. But I'm skipping down. Here's a new one that just came out. Plants talk to each other using underground fungus network. Now, if you think about what goes on in your body and brain, your body's made up of trillions of microorganisms. We've been taught that we're made of these microorganisms, and they send messages to one another. You can imagine trillions of You can talk about, some texts say 50 trillion, some say up to 100 trillion, but look at about 50 to 100 trillion microorganisms, then look at about 500 trillion other bugs that help these other microorganisms so that we can be alive. All right, so you're talking something close to 550 trillion microorganisms talking to you right now. And they have to work together in unity, and they do that by communicating. The immune system cells have to communicate. When I touch something that is hurting, it's going to destroy my fingers. The cells, they have to send a message to my brain to let me know that something hurt. You withdraw your hand. So messages have to keep going back and forth, So they send messages to one another. So it shouldn't be surprising that the bugs that make up the plants also send messages to one another. They send messages to one another. Everything is made up of these microorganisms. And I'm just going to skip on down here. Many plants have a chemical armory. The 93 now, I'm down to verse 93 here. Many plants have a chemical armory that they deploy when aphids attack. The aphids are insects, bugs that attack plants. With chemicals that both repel the aphid and attract parasitic wasps, the wasps that feed on those aphids, they're natural predators. So they call in a team to destroy these attacking aphids. And then you wonder, so they know when they're under attack, and they know what to do when they're under attack. But we look at plants like they're dumb, they're just in one place, but they're not so dumb. Okay? If a plant is growing in the shade, for example, and it's not getting enough sunlight, it knows it has to start to bend towards where the light is coming from. Okay? And it starts to bend, phototropism. We know that the roots have to grow downwards. So if you place the plant horizontally, the root somehow will find its way to curve downwards to get the nutrients and the water from the soil. So when they're attacked by insects, by pests, they know what to do, to call in help, to call for help. And But they're getting, all right, it says those unconnected by the networks of this fungus, appeared not to receive the signal of attack and showed no chemical response. So if the telephone line doesn't reach them, much like human beings use telephones to communicate back and forth when we're working together also, trying to get a project done, you see a lot of back and forth communication by email, by telephone, and so on. And anyone who's outside of the network coverage area doesn't get the signal. So you can think of this that way too, that this plant, says anyone, but it says those unconnected by this network, that those plants unconnected by this network appeared not to receive the signal of attack and showed no chemical response. So it's not just something that is spontaneous. It's something that they do in response to what they're experiencing. All right, so it's so I'm just going to go on down here. But they're getting close now to what we'll see here. Not today, but anyway, still talking about Genesis 3. I'm skipping down to 96. Okay, 95. It said, but they're getting closer now to what we'll see here. Not today. I'm already way over time. But anyway, the breath now, it's a divine inspiration. That's a few sermons in itself. And in Genesis 3:22 is where Satan talks Eve into sinning. And that's the first 7 verses. It shows, it shows that she sinned, but they put it naked, They knew that they were naked. The Hebrew word there showed the word actually means sin in verse 7. So, but verses 3 to 7 shows she talks them into wanting to be like the gods, to follow the practice of sin. So in 22 now, he says, then Yahweh said, behold, man has become like one who has begun to know righteousness and evil, and now he must not be allowed to put out his hand and also take of the tree of life and eat and live forever. And verse 23, therefore Yahweh sent him out of the garden. The garden, this word here, according to Strong's Exotic Concordance, the word garden means garden or protected place, out of the house of Yahweh, the protected place. So I'm skipping down now to 101, to verse 101 here. That was the message that he told Adam. He set him in the garden to guard and keep this. Don't let it change. Well, Adam, he wasn't deceived, but he was tempted into going to see grandmama, going to see Aunt Joe and Aunt Josephine, whoever it was he was going to see. And of course, he fell into sin. Whatever sin it was, sin is sin. He should have kept his mind on the garden, guarding and keeping it instead of going and visiting kinfolks. You need to do this, brethren. You need to buckle down and get to studying every minute you possibly can. Every minute you possibly can. Say, either study the books of Yisrayl, the books of Yahweh, listen to the sermons. In fact, you can listen to the sermons now in one ear if you can train yourself to do that. And read, that you listen to the sermon in one ear and read at the same time. You can do 2 things at once. You can study both ways here. You can listen to the sermons on the one hand and read on the other hand. Don't waste your time. Keep building your mind. It's going to be worth it. It's going to be worth it here in just a few days here now. You're going to see all this break loose, and we're going to receive this great gift. If you're ready, we need to study. We need to get ready. If you're not ready, you're going to get left out.